Today, we're talking with Junior Smart about how every young person has potential worth fighting for. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to start with you. I think that George and I often find that community leaders, activists, people working in the communities, I mean, they do so many things. They show up in so many different ways in their community. And so if somebody asks you what you do for your community or what you do, how do you normally respond to that?
It's such a tricky one to answer. I'd say, well, I work with young people, their families and their communities to reduce the likelihood of youth violence. And I train people, organisations to see the things that their systems miss.
Yeah, I mean, that's very elegantly put.
It's
It's
always
a hard
worrying.
thing, but that was perfect. Did you put it into ChatGPT? Were you expecting that
No,
question?
I'll be real with you. You know what happened, right? I'll be honest with you, Dylan, right? I get really nervous. I know it sounds really awful, but you're talking to somebody who spent 5 years, 260 weeks in prison. I still know to this day my prison number. So and I've seen people how they respond. So I naturally get nervous about talking about anything to do with my criminal history or my past, because people either want to salaciousise the thing, like, sensationalise it, oh, we're talking to somebody from Top Boy or something, or they see me as kind of like some sort of scum or scourge of society. So I've worked long and hard on trying to make the disclosure without having to make the disclosure, if you see what I mean. It was
Yeah.
really funny. The other week I was delivering training to probation officers, and I was really nervous, and then I thought, oh, I might as well just tell them I'm an ex-offender, blah, blah, blah. But then they were all like, yeah, naturally, of course you are. And it was just like, yeah. But it sounds
Yeah.
weird. You think after the way my life has been, but I still get very nervous about it.
Yeah, no, I mean it's understandable. You don't know how people are going to react, and I think sometimes you build the reaction up in your mind about what the way somebody could react.
Yeah.
But touching a little bit about that, I don't want to spend too much time on it. I based on what we've spoken about before, what I know about you, prison did play an important role in your journey and where you are now. If you could touch a little bit on it and kind of about your journey to leadership from within prison.
Yeah. For me, different people have said different things. Some people think that I was the head of a gang in South London. Some people would say I was just caught up on the periphery. But for me, these were a group of friends. And I mean that in a very real way. One of them was in the hospital room when my mum died, and as a male with all of that toxic masculinity and how we like to frame stuff, you frame a level of importance on stuff that may not have that kind of level of importance. But we became closer as a friend, and his friends became my friend. And to cut a long story short, I made a massive mistake. Got sent down for 12 years originally in 2001. And then it was after trying to take my life a few times that I decided I'd try and save it and save as many young people's lives that I came across as possible. That journey started with the Samaritans. I became trained up as what they call a prison listener within prison. And then that brought me face to face with the reality of what was going on in prison. So literally I was in my cell, and I kid you not, I'm looking down the wing, and I could see one cell drug addiction, next cell mental health, next cell refusal of payment of fines, next cell next to that, a person that's an alcoholic, next person next to that, a person who's been excluded from school. And I could literally just see trauma, cage next to trauma, cage next to trauma. And it was really humbling for me, because the one time I was able to see, it was so crazy, right? Because I had a group of friends around me, and their narratives about who I was and their narratives of their identity became my narrative. And it wasn't until I was out of that, crazily enough, in prison, a place that's filled with trauma and fear, that I actually could start seeing clearly. And the first thing that happened was that, I got trained up as a listener. The Samaritans teach you the rudimentals. And the reason why they train inmates to provide support to other inmates is because prison suicide was just huge. At one point, it was almost like 1 in every 20, if not more than that, actually, committing suicide. And I remember the first night, this guy called me out to his cell. He said, "Are you completely confidential?" I'm like, "Yeah." he's like, I need you to read me these letters. And he brought out a stack of letters this big, honestly. And I read it to him. And he said, but I need your help to write these letters back. Well, okay. But what I remember feeling that night is that even I was a person who dropped out of school without any single GCSE. I was a person who never have a good relationship with education or authority in any of its forms. You know, the person that you're seeing now and listening to now has done a lot of work on myself over the years. But what I took away from that night is that even when I had absolutely nothing to give, I still had something. And that reminded me, funny enough, my mum, rest her soul, she used to say to me, if you ever want to find out how much value you have, take away everything materialistic that you own. This was the time when I was really involved in, I was very materialistic. No, I want this, I want that. And we come from a poor family, so to have, we came from a scarcity mindset, so to have was a really big deal. And then I was like, here I've got nothing, and I'm still able to do something. I'm able to help. And it came in the form of, no, this isn't junior, this is helping somebody else. And then from there, that became a real big turning point for me. And I wouldn't say I became a leader. I became a leader for myself before I became a leader for anyone else. So the person that I was, it was always, I'd want everybody else's approval. But funny enough, when I carried out my offence that sent me down, I didn't ask anybody for their approval. I did it. So this time I was like, I'm going to do something for myself. And that was the start of a big change. I did education in prison. I started mentoring people. We got money in, like essentially as a serving prisoner, we brought in $5,000. We created we utilised the toe by toe reading and writing scheme. You know, the other day I was speaking to somebody from a different prison, toe by toe. We're teaching guys how to read and write in their cells. It's been very successful over the years I've been out of custody. And fast forward, Rochester Young Offenders had a riot. I was a serving prisoner at that time. They were like, will you go back into close quarter prison to help these young people? And I did. And I got a real thirst for it then. You know, I got a real thirst for helping young people caught up in this, because I could recognise their narratives. The narratives they were saying to themselves was the same narrative I used to say to myself. So from there, fortunately, I got a job with St Giles about 6 months before my release to establish a gang intervention project in London. And that started on the day after my release, and I've never looked back since then. Things have just leapfrogged from one incredible situation to another, and I've been very fortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear you. Just the way that just rolls off the tongue for you, Junior. It really is incredible. It's really inspiring, man. I just wanted to ask you to, obviously, me and Sage's whole thing has been sort of amplifying lived experience voices and finding community members who can really identify with the people that they're trying to help. So when you started working with those young people coming out, I wonder if we could talk more about what it is that they saw in you, why you were so successful at being able to help those young people.
Okay, so the SOS project, which I created at St Giles, there's a couple of key things there that had actually drawn from my lived experience. The first thing, so let's just talk about what SOS is. SOS provides holistic, tailor-made support to people that are caught up in negative, I wouldn't call it like lifestyle choices, negative cycles of criminality in all its forms. And they get, through the service, they get support from someone with lived experience, not just somebody with lived experience, but someone who's dedicated, trained. And there were lots of things that I saw happening within the system that I wanted to try and correct through SOS. So firstly, the whole idea of lived experience, back then it was seen as very risky. Like, you hang on a second, I remember going to this meeting, I was very smartly dressed, right? And I heard these people laughing. Have you heard of St Giles's new idea? Yeah, they want to get this ex-offender, and they want to get it, like, not ex-offender, this gang member, and they want to get him supporting other gang members. Yeah, I was like, and they didn't realise it was me. And I realised, oh my gosh, people are expecting me to fail. I'd never been in that situation before, because my peers were always like, no, Jay, you're a Teflon Don, you're unstoppable, you're this, you're that. People were expecting me to fail, and they were expecting me to be recalled, because I got given a 12-year reduced to 10. So I got out at 5 years, but I was still on licence for 5 years. So they're expecting me to fall, make a mistake, get called back. And what I wanted to do, but there's loads of things within the system, systemic failing. So one of the things is all of the services you can access are time bound. You can only access, so services will be with you 3 months, 6 months, and then that's it. You're dropped off. SOS they're non-time bound cases. We're working with young people, and I wanted it to be that if a person disengages and re-engages 6 months later, they can without any loss in that. We want lived experience. We want people with, but not just, we want people with lived experience leadership, because if you're gonna share your experiences, you're gonna share as a young person. The person I'm going to be able to relate to the most will be the one that I can most see myself in. No, I wouldn't disclose criminality to somebody who just knew what I was going through by a textbook. Disclosing to somebody with the best will can actually make things worse. You think about some of the people we work with now, criminal exploitation, child sexual exploitation. If they disclose some stuff, it can make things worse, because you'll get a practitioner go in with a heavy hand and no understanding, and it will just mess everything up. So my experience, my journey showed me that those closest to the problem are often the closest to the solution, and that's become the heart of my work. And, it has done continually. If you think about SOS Plus, the schools work that we do, it was never like nobody came into my school and said to me, 87% of people get stabbed with their own weapon. It's a common thing. But if you'd have said that to me, I would have said, well, actually, you live where I live, and you walk down the street at night without a weapon and see how well you survive. It's that understanding of what's going on. And so we need people that are credible, people that understand what's happening, and and also is consistent, that aren't just going to disappear, when funding changes, or when we, a 6 month deadline is over. We try to, and the funny thing was, it was that broke the camel's back, because it sounds great in theory, but in reality, as a service, we have to continually bring in more and more money in order to survive, because you can't shut the service down, and you have to try and find ways of keeping workers in their place. And yeah, there were issues around us. I really wanted to have people with lived experience. Well, actually, it turns out you can discriminate against people with a criminal record, but you can't discriminate against people without a criminal record. So there were people that didn't get the job, that wanted to get the job, that thought, actually, it shouldn't just be ex-offenders that get this. And they tried to make a big kerfuffle, and we had to find and navigate ways around it. Because, yeah, they were going to take a charity to court at one stage. But getting through that, and one of the things I got to say I learned is about myself is I actually like doing things the hard way. Whereas before I would have been like, no, that's too hard, I'd give up. I'm about to finish my PhD. So yeah, I'm definitely not the person that does things the easy way anymore.
Yeah, so one of the things I was interested in hearing more about was just the resistance that you initially faced when starting SOS, and why you think you experienced that. Because on the surface, it seems like such an amazing idea. And it is an amazing idea. Now that we have the results, we can understand, like, having a lived experience person who's been through it is the best position to work with people who are going through the same thing. But you talk about resistance, and you talk about people that didn't necessarily believe in the model. So maybe talk a little bit about why you think people felt that. Maybe they were fearful of change or doing something differently, and then what you went through to kind of like prove yourself and like actually get it going.
Right, well done, wonderful. Thank you so much. Really good question. So yeah, it was really bizarre. I'll tell you what it is. What's strange about it is I think there's a thing within us, isn't it? We like to think, we do a lot of projection. We think people think like us. We think that, almost like it's an echo chamber, but the reality is lots of people think differently. And I remember getting a very, very angry phone call from someone who didn't get the job. And ultimately what it was is that they felt that the job should never have gone, even though I got the job fairly. And, I can't tell you what a drama it was, because it was 6 months before my release. I had to apply for a release, what they call a release on temporary license, just to travel into London, which is crazy considering, I've been in prison. You had to navigate in the transportation system that had completely changed, just because I wanted to try and get a job to better my life. And the reality was, there are people. I remember coming back to the prison, like by the time I got to the train station, someone from St Giles had called me up and said, we don't want to let you wait, because we know if you get into prison, we won't be able to call you. So we want you to know that you got the job. We're going to fax through your job description and your salary to the prison for you to sign, if you could get it to send it back to us. And I remember the officer, the thing coming out of the machine, and he looked at the top line and he could see my salary, which was probably about the same, and he was really, really angry. They just don't like it. We get angry with offenders because we consider the offender to be the crime. No, the crime is what's bad. The offender's a human being, and that's where we get things wrong. There are people, I've known good and bad people with really dark hearts, and people that are really upstanding members of our, look at what we see in the world. And they're capable of delivering some absolute atrocities to other human beings. But an offender becomes a problem because we've always wanted to be seen like we're being tough on crime and tough on the people that commit crime. But actually, the person underneath it is a human being. And yeah, we encounter so much resistance. It is absolutely unreal. And
sorry, that resistance, do you think it's because you're trying to, because you're humanizing an offender, or you're trying to improve their lives and people are like showing resistance to giving that person a chance? Or
yeah, there's that. There's, there's that of like, why should they get a chance? I've had people say to me, I remember going along to this community meeting, and the police was saying, well, when that person's inside, this community gets a complete respite. Why should they ever, this is the thing. Why should that young person ever be free? I'm like, and this has always become my position is, hang on a second, you're talking about a 14-year-old child. This is a child, and I don't believe that person's inherently evil. I believe that person, just like things can be learned, things can be unlearned. And of course, 6 months later, that kid went on to finish school, stayed on, did their GCSEs. They were just going through a really tough point. But imagine if that person's perspective had been maintained. And it also, think about a kid going in and out of an institution, eventually become institutionalized, and that becomes their ceiling. Yeah, no, absolutely. They didn't like that. And also what occurred to me later is that some people actually have got a vested interest. So, some of what we do, everything of what we do, is common sense. But some people have got a vested interest. It's more valuable for them to think the way that they think. If you think about, like, look at what we're talking about in the world right now with immigration, there's some people that are very happy for society to think that all of our criminals come here on a rubber dinghy across the ocean. That's the best that can be the only possible answer. And they'd rather have you think the reason why you can't get a doctor's appointment, or your child can't get into school, is because that person on that boat is denying your child a place. But we know, I've studied criminology, we know that the reality isn't that. These are human beings that are fleeing violence. So the best thing we can do as a society is to dehumanize, because if we label them, we dehumanize, we take away their value, and that allows us to do things to them. Well, we've been talking about criminality and gangs and youth violence for decades. So, I've heard it since even when I was a teenager, one man walking crime waves and all that sort of stuff. And that all takes away from the fact that this is a child, this is a person with real potential. And if I'd been written off the way that other people wanted to write me off, my gosh, I would never have stepped into the service. I would never have be where I am now. I'd never be helping people. Some people would have just been happy I'd have stayed the rest of my life in a cell. And what was ironic about it is if I had have gotten away with my offence, I probably wouldn't have changed. I probably would have carried on doing what I was doing, because there was nothing taking me out of that loop. But because I got taken out of the loop, I got to see, now I see what's going on. What can I do differently? And that was what's the change about it. But I tell you when things really changed for me is, so the end of the first year, there was no reoffending at all. None of my clients had reoffended, and the national reoffending rate was about 67%. And then suddenly all of the naysayers, they stopped laughing or saying it wasn't going to work, and was like, hang on a second, what's he doing differently? And I don't mean to sound in a boastful way, but I remember one guy saying to me, you've got police, you've got probation, you've got youth offending team, and you, one person, you've managed to do what all of them haven't managed to do. Because I was working with really people that were seriously entrenched, and they weren't offending anymore. And then the Daily Mirror ran this piece, and suddenly it was silence. Everybody was like, okay, and then we got refunding, and then it was like, okay, what is there that we can replicate? The problem was the whole one of the key things was using ex-offenders. People still didn't like that idea, and so we kind of, what they said, if we fund St Giles, if we fund SOS, we kind of like get a bit of that, but without having to absorb the risk. People are fearful. People are fearful of what they don't understand, and that's a big deal.
Yeah. Have you seen changes in the larger system and in the way that the system's approaching? I think on the work that you're doing, but also talking about the system as a whole and the prison system as a whole. I think that one of the things that you talk about is that, like the hospitals versus jails, and if the hospital had as many patients coming back, as a prison said, they'd say that hospital's no good, it's a waste of money, close it down. But the prisons keep growing and more people go to prisons and the system doesn't necessarily change. So on both levels there, do you see the way that our support systems are changing, the way that we're working with ex-offenders or offenders, and also the way that the prison system's working?
Yeah, no, it's a powerful thing. I remember we used to go along to these partnership meetings, for strategic partnership meetings, and what would happen is we as ex-offenders, we would be held outside. They'd only invite us in when they were talking about our young person, and then we'd be politely asked to leave. Like now, like I said, I've been really fortunate. I've been able to go into places, prisons, probation. I've trained doctors, nurses, judges, prison staff on how to do things better. And many years ago, when we started this work, that just would not have happened. I remember going into meetings and people would be clutching at their bags like they think I'm going to rip it off their shoulders or something. It's absolutely ridiculous. So we have seen changes, but it's been really hard because it takes so much effort to move the needle. So for a long time we were championing release on temporary license, because a lot of my workers, they were serving inmates, and they'd be getting release on temporary license, coming to work for us and building an income, so when they got released they had something to come back to. Then we had those awful incidents where that person on release on temporary license attacked people down at Guildhall, and then they just shut down the Rottle scheme. So fear acted as the backstop, and it was like, no, we're not going to have that anymore. And my workers, I literally had to start a recruitment overnight. We had situations where COVID happened and we were arguing like, actually people need more time out of their cells, because the way it works in prison, you're usually on a 23-hour bang up. You're in a cell for 23 hours unless you're in education. But what happened was COVID shut everything down, and suddenly people were locked up in their cells back to 23 hours. And so then the needle reset, and oh my gosh, we've been working on that for like 15 years, pushing the needle back now, because they're saying no, that it just goes to show people can stay in their cells without any harm. It's psychologically damaging. Like people outside couldn't handle staying in their houses throughout COVID. People having mental breakdown for that. What do you think is going to happen to a person in an 8x16? But suddenly it was okay, and now they're talking about building more prisons again. It's shocking. It's a never-ending push to see things change and see things done differently. I mean, I can honestly tell you, thankfully, we've had a couple of near misses on the projects where things haven't gone the way we've wanted them to, but we've managed to hold it. But of course, it only takes one person to make a huge mistake or an oversight, and it could bring the whole project down. And loads of people will be saying, see, they should never have been trusted. So it's a consistent work of what I say. It's like working on the Sistine Chapel. That it's a consistent piece of work. You've got to see the whole picture. You've got to see the minutiae at the same time, and it's a constant juggle and a constant balance. But it doesn't mean it's not. You don't do things for the outcomes that are good. You do things for the outcomes that aren't as good. So every time we've made a mistake, it's reinstated our fire. It's reinstated our purpose. It's reinstated our reasons to make sure that we do things better.
You spoke a little bit about schools work, and I know that when we spoke the other day, Junior, you mentioned that some are usually that you see a spike in youth violence or a spike in knife crime. I wondered if we could talk about why it's getting worse. What's happening to young people at the moment, especially at this time. And where are we in July?
Yeah, sure. The thing about summer and youth violence is that summer Some exposes the cracks that are always there within the system anyway. And there's lots, it's a cacophony of, like a lethal cocktail, if you want to call it that, of lots of issues that intersect on the same. So firstly, let's just talk about, like, so poverty is the one thing people don't tend to think about during the summer, but it's massively exacerbated. So, for many, they call it the summer hunger, right? And the summer hunger is, unfortunately, for many, many young people that across the board, up and down the country, when they're in school, not only are they in a protective environment, they're under the supervision of an adult of some form, but they get access to a school meal. And now, throughout summer, parents aren't suddenly magically given time. I take my hat off. Like, there's so many families I'm working with, none of them, of their employers, have said, oh yeah, we'll give you 6 weeks off. You won't get that. You'll get 4 weeks off at tops. And that's across the whole year. So what happens is parents have to work because the rising cost of living is out of control, and so that means that children are often left without, under the care of a supervisor. I'll give you, in my own household, we've got my wife and me. We both work. She hasn't been given time off. I haven't been given time off. I'm lucky enough I can work from home. But had I been in a lower level job or somewhere else, I'd have to work. Where are the kids gonna go? And right now in the house, it's a consistent fight. We don't allow the kids to be on their devices all the time. We really don't. But the kids want to be. And so you can imagine, for a family where there's low income, actually, rather than the noise, rather than all of the issues, here's a device. And equally, as any of you, I don't know if anyone's actually been in a household where there's a scarcity of income. But the levels of stress, the levels of argument, young kids might not even want to be in that household. Earlier on this year, they talked about raising the energy levy. Well, for one of my families, that means that the mum's going to have to raise an extra £100. So she's going to have to work more hours, which means she's going to be away from the home for more time, not less. You've got the services which were already overstretched anyway. We're talking about years of money being taken away from community policing, social work, youth clubs. We talk about it takes a village to raise a child. Well, actually, we've allowed successive governments to raid the fridges bare. There isn't the community cohesion services there anyway. Only remember what area I went into, and I wouldn't name them anyway, but their youth services are decimated. And in one area I work in, it's the businesses that have kind of sponsored the youth club. So, and you wouldn't need things you wouldn't want to sponsor a youth space. You wouldn't want, a fast food restaurant to sponsor a youth. That sends out or a gambling company to sponsor a football. You wouldn't want that. That sends out the wrong sorts of messages to young people. And underneath it all, you've got, at the same time, social media is a massive grooming ground. We've brought out legislation which is going to be practically impossible to enforce. There's 1.1 billion websites out there. The measures they've brought in, it can't affect more than a handful at a time. We haven't got the resources as a country, as a world, to investigate every single website at all times for grooming. So young people, they're going to get enticed. And also, young people are dragged into this push-pull scenario where now, ironically, you can make money through producing more shocking content to get more views. So we've had everything from selling, like, teenage girls doing things that they shouldn't be doing, selling underwear to try and make money, to do all sorts of stuff. You've got grooming gangs, all sorts of stuff involved in that, and all of the political tensions around that. And then you've got young people, unfortunately, online where there's misinformation and disinformation flowing. So what kind of, and access to weapons. They don't just magically get a weapon. I was investigating this case the other day. Turned out that the kid got an adult or an older boy to order the weapon online. Zombie knife. Like, what on earth does it look like we're living in a zombie apocalypse? But he's managed to get it, go and get it and stab someone. And then we blame the child. But you can see that the majority of what I've just explained is happening in the world around the child. So okay, absolutely wrong. That person should not have harmed. No one actually ever has a right to harm another person, but you can see they're living in a world that the adults have created. And that all creates a situation where violence peaks because there's less people in protective care, to the care of adults, and there's more frequency of young people out there, and there's also this massive disinformation flowing. So it just makes violence more likely, and it's always been this way. It's always been this way. There's been peaks and troughs, but if you even look at it, it's never been down to one specific thing. Because another thing that we fail to do as a country is we fail to adopt consistent measures. So, you know, what you might see, like and you even see it in Chicago when they did the Peace Project, like lots of money invested for a short period of time. Once it looks like it's going all right, great, let's withdraw the funding, violence starts resurfacing again. Same thing here, we've been talking about public health approach for years, but the problem with it is we've never actually, it sounds nice coming off of the tongue. The reality is we've never actually adopted the public health approach because, you know, we've just gone through COVID. Now, that's a public health approach. Messages, you know, lesson, you know, we really went out of our way for that. Knife crime, nah, you know what? A couple of PSHE lessons here and there, that'll solve it. That's not how we address it. It needs a real consistent approach. And also, it needs investment, consistent investment. I honestly say this about young people. I hear it so often. These kids, they're hard to reach. No, they're not hard to reach. They're just easy to ignore. That's what it is. That's the problem. They're easy to ignore. And what tends to happen through summer, just as one more thing to say, is all of the systems in place, they ramp up enforcement. So we've already been told that over summer, there's 500 towns in the UK, they're going to have enforcement measures brought in by the police. They're not talking about prevention or diversionary methods and measures. They're talking about enforcement, which means that kids that are out there playing in the streets, playing in the playgrounds, playing in the shopping centres, they're going to become criminalised. And once they become criminalised, they're more likely to carry out negative action.
I mean, there's just so much to unpack there.
I know, sorry.
That I'm just gonna cherry pick the last line because it hit the hardest for me. Is like they're not hard to reach; they're easy to ignore. I know that you talk about there's this mentality of somebody else's problem, and like that child's not my problem; it's somebody else's problem. And you talked about how these are societal issues. So what can we do as a society to try to like take ownership in some of these issues and some of these problems? If it's a parent issue, if it's a society issue that's setting up a young person for failure, what can we do, or what are actions that somebody could take to try to be a part of these solutions?
You know, I think lean into clarity over activity. I think with what we should be doing is we need to see the person. We need to see the real person, the whole person, and in a holistic way. You know, I think that when we talk about these young people involved, we've got to remember it's a collective responsibility. We've all got to lean in together, because for every child that's lost, it's never down. It's seldomly down to one person or one organisation. And another thing we've got to do is we've got to stop vilifying the families. My PhD research showed that families are as much victim. They're far from the complicit picture that we're painted of parents that, you know, that they're often suffering and often they're calling out for help. So yeah, it's about coming together as a collective. And, you know, I think we need to create a space for that, because when we create that space, we can create space for hope. And that's where transformation starts.
I've been a bit quiet because I haven't needed to say anything. You know, it's just Junior. Like, honestly, it's Dylan and I are just so uniquely privileged to have been able to hear the stories and work with lived experience change makers all across the world now. And hearing you talk about it is just, yeah, it's just a real privilege for us, man. So, yeah, but anyway, that's all I was going to say. So you carry on, Dylan.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to give you some space, Junior, if you wanted to talk anything specific about SOS or SOS Plus, the programming that you're running, anything that you think's important, because we've been really focused on, I think, like the wider societal parts of the problem. But if there's anything specific, because I know you're doing a lot of just incredible work and the numbers that you're reaching.
Yeah. Is it all right if I share, like, I wanted to share, like, the most powerful lesson that I've learned? Yeah, because this thing has been reoccurring to me a lot. You know, when we think about young people, like, it was said to me the other day, like, oh, like, you know, you've been doing this work for almost 20 years, like, but you sound more passionate now than you did at the start. And the thing was, I've never let go of working with young people. I've actually still got young people that I work with. Like, so despite all of the titles and that, I never let go of being a frontline worker. And the reason why I never let go of it is because I didn't want to become so distanced from the problem. In fact, I still want to remain connected. Thankfully, young people still want the selfies with me. Do you know what I mean? That's absolutely awesome, the best thing ever. But I want to just say this, like, I honestly, the most powerful lesson I've learned through my work is that from the heart, I think every young person, like no matter their past, has potential worth fighting for. And I'm saying this, like nobody knows what a young person is capable of, not even them. And so their potential is absolutely, unequivocally worth fighting for. People often mistake difficult behaviour for like difficult character. I've gone into police stations and the officers have gone, that challenging, they're this, they're that, that person's this. Listen, when we've worked, I'm not just saying that we're the magical key. Listen, I've had challenges myself. I've had young people really fronting up to me. But listen, when I've always said, I say this, that when the tree falls, the tree really, really falls. The most difficult people I've worked with are the ones that often are the ones that needed the most amount of help. And sometimes it's not even easy because when you're being challenged, you miss the vulnerability that's going on beneath. It takes a lot to see past the behaviour and into their story. And it takes even more to draw hope out of a story if they can't see it. But like, honestly, that's where the transformation starts. That is. I know you're saying you feel really fortunate to listen to me. I feel really fortunate to be around the young people and be part, even like a sentence in there. So the best thing in the world for me is seeing a young person breaking the cycle. I can't tell you how that fills me with so much joy when I hear, like for example, some of the work that Si's done and the knives that have been handed to him. I'm like, oh no, that's where we need to be going, because at the moment they're talking about we're going to put knife bins. Where are you going to put the knife bin in a police station? I cannot imagine a young person going into a police station. That kid I talked about earlier with the zombie knife going into a police station saying, "There you are." Like they will find themselves criminalized before they're ever listened to as a victim. So, yeah, that's a big thing.
It's really interesting, Junior, as well, because Si was saying yesterday that he, just as you said earlier, like he really relishes that challenge. Like he loves working in an environment where 4 or 5 youth practitioners haven't been able to get through, and he's there. And he was saying that, if he's on a 12-week funded program, he's happy to do it for 18 weeks, for 24 weeks, because he really relishes in the challenge, but wants to help. And it's just, you two share such similar characteristics in your approach to this. So I was wondering, to make that connection, whether you could talk a bit about your involvement on the Compass project and what that's going to be in Luton.
Yeah, so you know what happened, right? So if I can just mention how I met, many years ago, right? This isn't even that long ago. There's been a lot of youth killings happening, and there was one that actually happened in Luton, in a shopping centre, in the public, in front of the public, a massive like knife fight. They showed it on TV actually, and kids were murdered. And I'd moved up to Milton Keynes just shortly before my son had been born. And Luton, which was where my wife was from originally, there was a lot of incidents going on there. And I just thought, I need to go, I need to be where the community is. I need to hear what's going on. And I heard parents talking about how they lost their children. And the thing that always resonated between myself and Si, because I didn't really know him. I mean, I didn't really know. I kind of heard about his music stuff, but it was how he was able to reach, how he was engaging with the families that had lost their children, that had really got to me first. Because in my arena, there's lots of people that are there, and really what they're after is a title. They want to climb onto the top of the mountain so everyone can see that they're on top of the mountain. And, they want to create a service that everyone else can see. The real work doesn't happen then. It actually happens in a moment-to-moment reality where people connect. And they connect because they trust you, and they trust you because they know that you're fundamentally going to do something different. And it was just how the families were talking to him You know, he knew every single parent that lost a child by name. Like, who does that? Like, he's a musician. You know, he's a musician. He's actually invested in the community. And so me and him started to talk, and then we realized that we were kind of kindred spirit, because that's what I'm like. I'm not a person. I don't really care about a title. And in fact, I remember in my social entrepreneur journey reading a book. It's really worth reading, actually. It's called The Leader Without a Title. I stole it. I'm gonna be real with you. I stole it. I stole it from the School of Social Entrepreneurs Library. I don't feel bad about it, because in terms of all the sort of stuff I could steal, like stealing knowledge is kind of worth stealing. No, actually, I joke. I told them that I had it. I just haven't returned it. Anyway, like, yeah, just to clear the record, like, you know, reformed, like, you know. But the leader without a title changed my mindset, because you don't need a title to be a leader. And you don't, like, the people that want to lead, the people that want a title are often the ones that you shouldn't be following anyway. So anyway, yes. So I've wanted to do that. You know, I don't know, George, if I'm allowed to say, but you know, I've wanted to do some real work in Marsh Farm for a long time. A little while ago, I was, you know, it was at the start of my PhD journey, and we couldn't get it together. Si ended up coming and working for me over on SOS. He was doing our hospital work. He's been doing some fantastic. My gosh, he's turned me into a believer around these bleed kits, because before I thought, well, actually, we need to be doing more intervention. Where he's shown me how the bleed kits make a tangible difference in the community. And then we were sitting down, and it's like, okay, show me who are the hardest to reach where you are, and we were mapping it. Then, you know, from that map came the Compass Project, which is going to engage, you know, the hardest to reach children through a range of activities. And again, at the centre of it is using lived experience, but also has got a restorative element as well. And I think that's where we're coming from with the Compass Project, because you know, we've actually got we're going to have a range of programs that we're going to do for the children. And yeah, the good thing about it is ethically it's right. The target group that we're aiming for is 100%. It's 100% on point. The consistency of it is on point. You know, like it's practically a full long year program on and off. And also it's in the centre of the community, the very place when I met the parents, which was Marsh Farm, which is kind of like a community grassroots led organisation, and it always has been. And ironically, it was as we were developing the program that you had the murder on Marsh Farm with that young kid. In that, you know, this just goes to show it's the place to do the work. There's been a number of murders there. Like, I think we're getting close to 100, if not we've crossed that line already. So the whole idea of doing a community, like I said, going to where the young people are, mobilising the people there, and then in the long term, bringing peace between Marsh Farm and Lucy Farm, where there's always been tensions between the young people historically, it would be a really big thing.
Amazing.
I'm over here taking notes because you just have so many one-liners that I'm going to steal from you, Junior. Don't go to my blog post, because you're just going to see a replicate of everything we've talked about, because there's some just pure gold here. And just, I mean it in a funny way, but also very seriously, just some like really inspirational stuff. I think to finish, we always just end with, you know, like what do you hope people take away from this? Any like the main message somebody's listening to, and then also where they can find more about your work and what you're doing.
Okay, you know, so I think what I want people to take away is, no, I want everyone to remember actually that transformation is never linear. Now, my journey wasn't linear. No one's journey, I think, is actually ever linear. Like, our systems, our policies, society often, I think our biggest mistake is that we expect quick fixing. Yeah, we expect that as well, that people won't relapse, when actually relapse is common with everything else. You know, nobody, as I heard of, you know, no child ever learns to walk first time. Nobody, you know, people have go on yo-yo diets and all sorts. People have tried to give up smoking hundreds of times, and it takes them so many times to get there. Everyone has their own end outcome, and it takes them time to get there. The problem is our systems aren't quick to forgive. If somebody makes a mistake, that they're written off, especially in the work that we do. But actually, it takes time, it takes consistency, and true change it demands patience, it demands persistence, and it demands compassion. And I honestly think that every young person we support isn't a quick fix. They're not like, I don't think, I don't start work thinking, yeah, I'll have that kid turned over in like 48 hours. It's never been like that. 20 years on, it's never been like that. But they're not statistics. They represent potential futures we can positively shape. I think we've got to invest wisely and compassionately. 100%.
Yeah.
Amazing.
All right.
Thank you so much, Junior. It's just
No
been,
worries.
as I said, it's been great to hear from you. And obviously, we're going to be in touch about the Compass Project and Wingman and everything that you're doing. Yeah, it's just really awesome to hear from you, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much, George. And listen, thank you so much for your support. Because the thing I've got to say is what you're doing is just absolutely incredible. And it takes a lot for people to actually listen. It really does. But when people do listen, you reach out for them. If somebody's actually listening, like you reach out for that person, because there's so many people that just don't. So many people just, it's not my problem. It's not happening where I live. It's not happening to people around where I am, or I haven't got the time for that. You're one of those people that have consistently listened. So thank you so much. It means the world, honestly.